Hello, everyone. I'm Yahya Bayramoğlu. I'm an Android engineer at Uber, and I will be talking about working in different sizes of companies today. Um, just to refer the title, what are the differences working as a single Android developer or iOS developer in a company versus working as one of the many of them? But before we move forward, I actually want to know the audience a little bit so that I can actually decide where to focus forward or where just move a little bit faster. So we have a poll for you. Please go ahead and on the slide or just submit your answer. In the question is how many developers that you have in your domain as in part of your company. If you're an Android developer, how many Android developers in the company? If you're an iOS developer, how many iOS developer in the company, and so on. We will just wait for a minute or so just to get the answers. Um, the slide link is below, so and you can choose the stage on the left top corner, the castle stage.
Mm-hmm. Glanced.
Yeah. Actually, I'm really glad to see that the range is not over 100 or just 0 to 5. The idea of asking this question, I'm gonna move on. I think it's already gives the idea. So moving on with the slides. The idea of asking the question because I started as a single Android developer in a company that is an agency that I was building the application and I was responsible from the beginning till the end of the process. It depending on like which architecture, which tools that we want to use, which framework, which libraries, or how to sign even and where to keep the keys. Um, so all these kind of things that decisions were made by me because I was the single Android developer and I knew the most about the platform. But then I got an offer from a company that they already had like 25 Android developers, and I was like, "Whoa, what does that mean? Like, do they have like 50 Android applications, or like what are those people are doing?" I wasn't even able to comprehend 25 people being able to work on one source code base. But this is like I'm talking about years ago. Now I'm more aware. What does that mean? Obviously, working with 25 people is different than working with yourself, right? Uh, you realize more the power of the community, first of all. Power of the community in terms of that it pushes you to grow, first of all, because then you have a certain group of people that are working the same way, the same environment, and the same tool with you every day and the same platform and the same code base, right? Whenever you have a question or a problem that you can just ask and iterate further. And then you're not the only one who is trying to find good practices, best practices, or new tools or anything, but there are so many more people that are trying to do and then they are trying to push things. So with that, actually you grow quite significantly. And after that, I moved to another company. Then I was part of 7,500 developers. I was already like, yeah, okay, this is, I think, like quite big. I cannot even like, think any further. And then I moved to Uber, and now we are around 300 Android developers. What does that mean, though, right? Working with a lot of people brings up the human aspect uh, brings the importance of the human aspect a little bit more. So first thing is people are different, right? Um, the more people means the more opinions. The more opinions means the more discussions. And discussions are mostly for better, because you're trying to understand whether that is the thing that you should follow, that the idea is actually for the better, or there can be other alternatives, right? Because the more people also means the more responsibility, right? The decision that you are trying to make is not only going to be affecting you, but also going to be affect a lot of more people that is going to work in on the same code base, same structure, same environment. So moving on this, it is not like me taking decision saying that, hey, I'm gonna, I don't know, wanna use Kotlin, right? As a single developer in a company, I would be like, yeah, tomorrow I'm gonna switch to Kotlin, right? And then I'm the responsible. If something goes wrong, I need to figure out how to fix it. And I'm the only one who needs to learn how to write it. And I'm the only one who needs to maintain it, right? But if you're working with more and more people together, uh, there are so many more aspects to consider this, like whether the people are ready to learn this language, or do you have enough tooling or trainings out there to learn the language, whether your environment tooling or your structure supports this, or do you need to do an pre-work to support it first of all, or how it's going to affect the performance of the people, whether they're going to slow down work, and how it's going to impact the company, and so on. So these kind of decisions comes with a lot more responsibility than being alone, or 2 to 5 people alone, so on. And if you're working in an international company, which I do really like it, because every day you learn from different people, different culture, and even just from different languages, the way that they say things, that brings up a different aspect, the different perspective, right? So if you're working in a different international company, that means a lot of people have different languages to speak. And often it comes to the point that speaking your own language is easy, right? Because I'm not a native speaker English, and a lot of people are not as well in an international company. And what happens if I see a Turkish person, I want to speak Turkish, right? But this comes with a price, because it is not inclusive in terms of that if you're talking about work-related stuff, especially, and the colleague next to you has the context that can contribute to the discussion, will be automatically excluded, right? So we can discuss like half an hour in our own language, but maybe my colleague had the context that could have solved this discussion in 5 minutes, right? Or even in the coffee breaks. If you are speaking your own language, it is more acceptable, but it still has the boundaries, right? If you speak your own language and your colleagues or your teammates or any other person is basically walking around, are not able to contribute, are not able to join the conversation. This is more about bondings, right? It's of course up to you to decide who do you want to bond with, but being more connected to people helps in further as well. Okay, besides this, your own language versus common language, there are also the way of communicating, right? Which mostly comes from the culture. It can some of the like the biggest difference between cultures and language are some of them are very direct and some of them are indirect, right? Uh, the important part is the intention, regardless how do you state that intention, right? I can say, hey, I disagree with you because of this reasons. Or I can say, yeah, great idea, but how about if we would consider this aspect as well, right? I, both are saying the same thing. Both somewhat disagree and they want to propose a different solution. It's just the way that they communicate is different. But this might create a lot of conflicts, especially if it is a written communication, because then you lose the whole impression, you lose the intention mostly, let's say. I'm going to talk a lot about this tiny sentence. It is quite good. what does that mean? Like, is it like, is it? Mm, it is quite good. Like from my impression, you can say I'm not satisfied. It's okay. It's average, right? But I can also say, well, it's quite good. Like you can see that I am excited. I am like it's good product. I'm interested in this. But you can tell if you see my impression. If this is a written conversation, it highly depends on the culture again. Because if you search like on Google what British says versus what they mean, this is one of the things that comes up there. Because if a British native speaker person says it is quite good, it's mostly mean it's average, it's okay, not good enough, but it's okay. But if an American English speaker would say this would mean like, yeah, it's good. It's like pretty okay, right? And then let's assume a conversation between two people and they are trying to decide whether to buy or not the product, right? And one of them ends the conversation saying it is quite good, and the other person should it buy or not? We don't know, right? Because it is quite good in this context could mean that the person is satisfied or not, but the decision, who is going to take the decision, might have the complete opposite, right? So it is important to clearly communicate. If you say it is quite good, but let's evaluate the other alternatives, right? Versus it is quite good, let's just buy it, is different, even though they start both the same sentence. To dive into a little bit more in this subject, I have two questions for you. So if you go to Slido, there are two polls that I want you to quickly answer. And then we will get back to the slides. So I'm going to give it 2 minutes just to get answers and see how we go there.
Yes, the poll is live now, so our attendees, please answer. What do you think is the answer to this question? We will wait a
Do we
few seconds to see, and then I will see the results, or I will show them to you. So right now
yeah.
it's secret voting, but in a few seconds I will put the results visible. So please go to Slido and answer this question. What do you think is the correct answer?
Do we ask them one by one, or do we want to ask both together?
So you can choose one of the answers right now. So we have a few answers already. So I will show you the results.
Mm-hmm. Oh, perfect. Great. I'm so happy to see this variety, actually. I was afraid that it's going to be lean to one direction. So the question is, nope, not this one. Sorry, spoiled. Um, the question was, let's set up a bi-weekly meeting. How often do you meet? Is it once in 2 weeks or is it twice a week? And both answers are correct, by the way, because it is because of the biweekly here. Biweekly means either once in 2 weeks or twice a week, right? And if you didn't know this, it is the answer that you chose for yourself. For me, it was always once in 2 weeks until I've realized about this bi-weekly thing, which is also bi-monthly and bi-annually and all. They are same aspect. They always means either once in two or twice a, right? And this is quite a hidden context that if you didn't know, if you're not aware, you can completely miss this. And well, how to avoid this is basically, instead of saying let's set up a bi-weekly meeting, you can say, hey, let's set up a meeting that we meet once in 2 weeks or twice a week. It is quite difficult though, because if you don't know this, it will come naturally to you. You won't notice until it's too late, until everyone is trying to meet in different dates. Shall we ask the second question on Slido?
Shall we, or you already discovered the answer?
No, it's fine. I think it will still give us the what diversity here. But yeah, I mean, just for the time saving, I think we can move on.
Okay.
I will just talk about it. So moving the next Wednesday's meeting 2 days forward. Which day is the meeting, right? Is it Monday or is it Friday? Maybe I'm too developer here, because for me the answer here is a straightforward, pun intended. If we think about Wednesday and the week goes Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, for me Friday is the answer. But if you think about it, it can also mean that 2 days forward means that that meeting comes to you, comes closer. So it can be Monday. In terms of, I even saw like some explanations, people saying that, yeah, if the meeting is 2 days forward, that means its importance is increased, so it should be earlier, kind of explanation. But it all depends on the context. It all depends on person's understanding, right? As I said, to me, it feels completely natural to consider this as Friday. And if I'm the one who sends this message, I probably had this in mind and I didn't even think about it again. I was just like, yeah, this is Friday. I send it over 2 days forward. What I could do instead, saying that moving the next week, Wednesday's meeting to Monday, to Friday, right? To whatever date it is. So these are the quite tricky ones because they are context hidden miscommunications, and they are really difficult to detect. But just to double read what you're writing or make sure everyone is on the same page every time that you say something. So working together also not only about like having the language, also about more um, different ways of collaboration, right? There are so many tools trying to make this collaboration easier. I'm just gonna list a bunch of them, but the idea is all these tools are there to help you, right? But what if you cannot choose, or what happens when the preferences comes into play and you choose different ones, right? Because you are working in a big company, that means that a lot of different people has different preferences. So you might end up having Jira, Trello, Asana all together, right? Some teams works with Jira, some teams works with Trello, some teams works with Asana. And then you ask like, hey, could you please give me the link to your board so I can create a ticket? And then they're like, oh, we use Trello in our team. So here is a link. And then you need to register. You need to request access to their board, create a task. It's just like, it can be completely painful. So if this kind of decisions are made by a company across, then you have all kind of environment that is set up for everyone the same way, so that you don't need to deal with it. But it's most of the time it might not be the case, and you have to cope with it. Having also a lot of different tools, for example, for the documentation, it is one of the most painful things that I face, actually, because there are so many different tools, as in Confluence, Google Docs, Workplace. It's basically Facebook for work. And then you have the post. You can just post and you can create notes and so on. Or you can create MD files and keep them in Git repo, right? Or you can have them all. Or you can even create your own documentation tool, right? Like some source code that you write it down and how to create the file, and then you can still do MD files and so on. But the problem with that, every time that you try to find something, everyone keeps their documentation in different places, and you link them, and then some of them decides to migrate to another tool, and then all the links are broken, and then you're trying to find them all again. So it's just like, it can be completely difficult to find the right documentation for your purposes. But then what comes handy here is mostly writing bookmarks or asking people what are the tools or what are the links that you can use for. And also, if you are using Google Docs and so on, Google helps a lot, right? When you search, if you already open the doc and you know something from the title of what you are searching for, it will already autocomplete and suggest you to documentation link and so on. So Google has somewhat a good around environment there. If you are using Workplace, for example, the search tool is also again great. You can search and find all the documentations that you need. GitHub, maybe some string words search and so on. And then you can always build your internal search tool, which is a thing. The same thing goes with the messaging. You might end up using Slack, Jabber, Google Hangouts, right? Because Google Hangouts come with by default if you are using Gmail client. And if you're using Slack as a communication tool, some people just keep using Google Hangouts, and then you try to send them a message and they don't see it. And then you send an email saying, hey, I asked about you. I asked this about this and didn't get an answer. And then they're like, yeah, I use Google Hangouts. And then you're like, I didn't know that. So it's a complete chaotic situation. There is nothing to do, actually. It depends on the company culture. It depends whether it's top to bottom or bottom up or both, some mixture, or how settled they are on the tools. You just need to figure out how to cope with this. As we talked about having a lot of people working together, what most important is the stakeholder management, right? Because we talked about having discussions being made to take a decision, but then because also that what you take the decision is not only affecting you, right? It affects more people. But then you cannot take decision with everyone involved at once, right? You cannot, you need to involve more people, but you cannot involve everyone. If, for example, as an Android developer, if I want to take a decision, I cannot involve 300 people. I cannot sit together and talk to them, right? So what you can do, you can create a small working groups. You can say, okay, 2, 3 people or 5 people, whatever, is going to work on this. And then we're going to come up with a proposal. We're going to write down the context, the problem statement, that what we are trying to solve, and how are we aiming to solve, or what are the alternative solutions that we could think of, but we didn't choose because of whatever reasons, right? So you can write them all, and you can ask a review. Hopefully the review process is quite good defined. I've worked in companies that was not defined properly. I've worked in the company that is quite structured. So depending on whether it's defined good or not, it might be a bit of pain to take the decision, because it might end up that no one knows how to take the decision. So if it is quite defined well, then it's good. If not, start with that. Having the proposals also comes with a good side that people can comment as offline, because you cannot have meetings with everyone all the time, especially if you are in different time zones and your colleagues wakes up 8 hours later or whatever, and then you don't have any time overlapping, so you cannot just have all the time meetings. So it's good to have an offline comments, and then you can reply them. You know who's interested now, you know who's involved. You can just set up, send an email communication, start communication, or start a meeting, and so on. What is important as well, that you do take feedback and iterate. Just because you wrote down a proposal, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be accepted, or you maybe didn't think about all the aspects of the thing that you are proposing. So get the feedback, iterate on it. It might not be first time, but you can just iterate and write it a different solution, or even improve the solution that you propose, and so on. Another thing that I want to talk about is the meetings and emails. So here I'm gonna give you a meme, and I really hope that you already know this, because it is funny. Um, so this entire staff meeting could have been an email. You wouldn't have read that email either. When I saw this email, the meme, and I was like, this is funny because it is true, right? Why this happens? This happens because the more people, the more projects, the more proposals, they are all trying to align, right? What happens then, you try to set up meeting with people, try to get to the same understanding so that you can actually take the decision, right? Or understand the problem better so that you can solve it. But the thing is, there are some meetings that are just for announcement, for informative, right? Which can be an email. Like, yeah, you build a new tool. So instead of making a meeting trying to announce it, you can send an email saying that, hey, these are the things and so on. But then what happens if you are working in a big company and you have a lot of emails coming, then you're overwhelmed, right? And then filtering starts. So if you're using Google already, then you have like a Google Groups that is already the first filtering. Depending on which audience that you are in, then the rest will not get the emails. And then people start creating their own filters. They wanna, make sure that they get the emails that they are interested in, or they mark as read and label somewhere, or you just take a look and then say, okay, I'm not interested, move forward, and so on. And then it starts with another level of filtering. And the emails, people start writing, hey, TLDR, if you're not working with this service, ignore this email. And then you're like, okay, from first sentence, I'm done with this. Or whoever writes the email, they want it to be read, right? That's the purpose of writing the email. No one writes an email that no one's gonna read, right? And what happens, in order to increase the awareness of the email, then you started to see like action required, or time sensitive, or must read, or important kind of prefixes on the emails, because they want them to be read, right? So it's kind of an important situation to be able to manage your own time, but also manage from the sender perspective. Unfortunately, there's no like a silver bullet here. The only thing that I can say, make sure that you start from the beginning, having a clean inbox, because it can go out of control quite fast. So create labels, filter them, move them in certain folders, take a quick glance, and then decide where it goes. And then whenever you need, you can find them again. So if you're using Workplace, for example, in the company, that you will see that people will use post on groups directly in the Workplace. So you don't even need to care about grouping, labeling, and moving in certain positions, right? It's going to be there. And since Facebook uses algorithm to understand the relevancy for you, you will see it on your timeline depending on whether you're interested or not. But if not, you can always search for it. You can always find them there. Example. Another example, one of my favorites actually, working together with multiple people, a lot of people, is the code reviews. That is not straightforward. I thought it was. It is not. Why it's not straightforward? Because depending on how many people that you're working on the same code base, you're developing the same application, you might end up having different solutions, right? If you are one person, for example, reviewing your own code is a best practice, I would say. You can still notice things, but it's not as productive, or it's not as important as more people reviewing each other's code, right? Because you are the one only taking decision and doing things. But if you're working with like 2 to 5 people, and so on, then you can say, okay, you know what, we can just talk to each other. Hey, can you review? Do you have time? Can you please look into this? Or you can say, okay, we're gonna do it in order, right? I'm gonna review your code, you're gonna review his code, you're gonna review her code, and then you're gonna, do an order. Or you can even consider randomizing, right? You can write a script that randomly picks someone, assign it, and then review it, right? But the entire idea, beside the code quality and so on, is also to share the domain knowledge, right? By randomizing this, you can actually make sure that enough rotation that people have to review different side of the code base. But what about if you are like 75 people or 100 people, 200, 300 people working in the same code base? Can you really think that randomizing this review process will help with domain knowledge, right? It won't, because you cannot expect me to have the domain knowledge of somewhere that I've reviewed once, right? Domain knowledge is not something that you can get at once just by reviewing it, right? Then you're going to start asking more questions, which is going to be irrelevant, and people will start explaining over and over and over again the same thing. So it's not as efficient as it was with 2 and 5 people. So then what you do is you can either create a smaller groups. Let's say, yeah, we're gonna randomly pick 5 people, and those 5 people will review each other's code all the time, so that they at least share domain knowledge within certain groups. Or you can say, yeah, we're gonna have like, I don't know, as an example, in payment, for example, let's say we have 5 teams, then we gonna review all this 5 team each other's code, right? So we are still somewhat a group, but not necessarily the entire organization, right? Organization ownership is another grouping, right? It is the most important grouping probably, because if I'm changing a code that is in your ownership area, you have all the right to review it, because you're going to be the one who is going to work with that code from tomorrow on, right? I maybe will check that again, but it's your code now because it's in your ownership. So ownerships are like, depending on how many people owns what, it can be considered as a group, but then it is important to auto-assign and notify people, right? Because if you have an ownership of a file that you don't know, like, yeah, okay, I changed this file, but who is the owner? Who am I going to ping? Who am I going to ask for a review, right? It can be a quite time-consuming, and you might actually never find it, right? So it is important to automate this process. Make sure that whoever is the owner in GitHub, for example, or GitLab, all these tools are trying to find a way to clearly define the ownership, right? So automating these things helps a lot. By automating, I want to also talk about the conventions. So there are certain things during the code review. Mostly it's fine when you're a few people to talk about it and have a convention saying that, hey, from now on, we will do this in that way, right? But if you are hundreds of people, it is very difficult for everyone to keep this in mind and remind each other, right? Or if you cannot expect and someone joins the company new to know or learn about this. You can write it down, sure. But when you write them down and it's a huge document, it's going to be really difficult for everyone to read and find those things, right? So static analyzers, therefore, is exact same purpose, right? You automate things. You don't need to go and poke person on the code review saying, hey, this should be in alphabetic order. Hey, can you please put a space here, right? Like this kind of things, if you can automate it, automate it. Write analyzers, right? So considering all of these aspects of working with a lot of people, one of the skills like gets incredibly important, which is the communication skill, because it can be related to language, culture, and human aspect, right? It is important to communicate well. I know you already think about it, yeah, right? I knew this skill would come up. It's always the same skill, right? I'm sorry, that is the most important skill. You might be a brilliant person, but first of all, I might not even notice if you're brilliant or not if you don't have a good communication skill to represent that, right? Maybe you are brilliant, but you're not reflecting that to me, right? Second of all, even if you're a brilliant person but don't have a good communication skills, I might avoid working with you just because you don't have these skills, right? There are two ways of solving things. I can work with you and solve it, or I can work three different people and solve it again, right? So unless you're a single point, in a company, that happens. Lack of communication skills is painful, not only for you, everyone in your team, everyone in the bigger group of the teams, and in the company as well. So it is important for companies to encourage the communication skills as well. I've worked in a company that the communication skills was like first citizen values, in terms of during interview, they would evaluate the communication skills. During performance evaluation, they would evaluate the communication skills, even for promotions and so on. You might think that can become a career blocker at some point. Yes, it is possible, but it is important for people to invest time on it. It is expected from the company for you to invest time to improve the communication skills, so that since it is in the core, they will also provide you more trainings, challenges, feedbacks from your peers, and so on. So it's very important, if whether it's part of the company goal, values or not. You can try to understand this by during interview asking questions or trying to understand how they interview you, right? Communication skills is basically required everywhere, right? Leadership. Can you think of a leader that doesn't have a good communication skill, that doesn't inspire you, that doesn't feel you that you can trust, you can follow that person? Or can you think of a leader that is not able to communicate what his vision or her vision is, right? Documentation. This is one, I don't want to give name, but we know great tools suffered a lot from not having a good documentation, right? Documentation comes with a lot of different aspects depending on your audience, right? Or the reader. If you're writing for developers to read, you can give like code examples. But if you're writing for anyone else, explaining the algorithm might be more useful than just giving the code, because they need to decrypt it, right? The same thing goes with emails. Emails also rely on the audience, who is reading, right? It can be depending on whether you're sending the email for an informative purposes, or feature request, help seeking type of email, or just announce a new thing, marketing, right? Meetings, on the other hand, it's more interactive, right? It's not like one-to-one, but it's more people. That means everyone in the meeting is responsible how the meeting goes, right? If you see that a meeting is staling and it's just not taking any action point or going in, or you're not able to take a decision, you have the responsibility to take step up and try to drive it as well. It's not only about organizers, for example. If you see that is not possible, then try to be more active, right? If everyone in the meeting is not active, then no one's gonna, move forward, and then you're gonna have rescheduling meetings, trying to find, different aspects of it, and so on. The last 2 points I want to give a little bit more details. Feedback and messaging. Feedback. Providing feedback is very important, because that is the most important or easier way for people to know whether what they do is good or bad, not necessarily bad per se, but where they can improve or not. It is really important to provide it often. And it is also important to provide not only for development purposes, but also motivational. So if you see someone is doing something good, you can say, hey, this is great, keep doing it. Hey, you did that, and then it just improved this. Hey, this was amazing. You did a great job. The motivational feedback is also important. Otherwise, whenever you try to approach someone, they're going to be like, oh, I'm going to get a negative feedback now, So try to provide both whenever they are needed. And when you provide a feedback, make sure that you provide with the concrete examples. What happened, when happened, how it happened, and what was the problem, and how did you feel, and how that person can improve it, right? That you're providing the feedback, but what can be done there? It's just not like, I don't like you. This is not a feedback, right? Try to make sure that formalize your feedback. You can search for feedback frameworks or formalizations. There are a lot of different types. It's easy to formalize it, but it is difficult to give feedback most of the time. Just make sure that that doesn't hold you back though. On the other hand, when you receive a feedback, please do not take it personally. Of course, it might be directed to you, but take it in a way that it is given to you to improve yourself, not necessarily to challenge you or anything else. And then you can evaluate yourself whether that person felt that way because of some like a real case, or it was just not the case, but then that's another feedback, right? Because then if someone gives you a feedback, there is always a case, whether it is true or it's just how it looked like, right? Try to understand the difference as well. Try to evaluate for yourself if you feel that way or if it is just how it felt outside. Then that is also a good reflection, so you can think how to improve it. Or if it is true, then take action, do something. Or feedback also can be given to product or the team, right? When you get a feedback, make sure that you're not being defensive and say, yeah, that's not our team's problem, that's their problem. We worked with them and then they didn't do it. Just take the feedback, because the person who gives you the feedback, they might not have the full context. They might not even be aware of the other team that was doing the thing, right? Just take the feedback, take your part of the feedback and give the rest to another team that was whichever it is. And most important thing, when you get a feedback, make sure to share action items, because saying thank you for your feedback is no different than saying, yeah, right, thanks, whatever, right? Make sure to share what you're gonna do with that feedback. Okay, yeah, sure, I'm gonna create a ticket for this. I'm gonna follow up with that person. I'm gonna talk to our designers. I'm gonna talk to this team. I'm gonna do this. Say something what you're gonna do with this feedback. And messaging. This is my last point. I've been trying to catch up with the time. So I'm gonna a little bit slow down and then just show you a conversation between me and my colleague. But before we start that, there is a poll after my talk to rate and give feedback. Please do so. It is really important for me to understand whether I should continue with this kind of talks or do follow-up talks even or not. So, messaging. Let's say I have a problem. I need to talk to my colleague and, get a help. And I'm like, hey, this is my favorite type of starting conversation. It is 3:30 and it's my time, right? But my colleague lives in different time zone and he wakes up after I'm done with working, right? And then he writes in his time saying, hey, is it 10:30 already in my time, and I don't really look up on my messaging tool and so on. And I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna see it tomorrow in the morning. And I'm like, how are you? Sure, my colleague says, fine, and you? And I noticed this at 8 because I still don't work at that time. So I see the answer next day. And I'm like, fine as well, thanks. At this point, I realize that if I don't say anything else, the conversation is not going to go further, right? So I say, I have a question. And my colleague is nice. So he replies, sure, ask away. Please do so now already, right? And then I say, I get an error when I request your service. All right, I think at this point, my colleague is as annoyed as we are, right? So he goes full on. Okay, can you give me more context? What are you trying to do? Which service? What request to send? Like, what is the error? Just give me something so that I can help you with, right? We spent already 4 days and still a going discussion, and we didn't even get to any point, right? So don't be this person, don't be this. But instead, you can just say, hey, hope you're doing well. I'm working on project A, and I'm trying to send this request to service B. You can also link an output of the request that you're trying to make, for example, in this case. But I get an error saying can't access with this output, and also link the output of the error that I get with full context on it. Could you please take a look and let me know what might be wrong here? And then my colleague wakes up, goes to office and says, oh, okay, hey, seems like you're missing this pretty important variable called token. It won't work without it. You can find more information on this page. And then he also gives me a link to documentation of that service, all these internal things that I need to be aware of and so on. Perfect, right? I wake up in the morning, I have the answer, I have more context on how to solve this. Done, it's solved already. So being concise and to the point communication during messaging or even emails is pretty important for you and everyone else's time management. That's from me all. Thank you, everyone. And don't forget to leave feedback